Hello, students. Let us continue with the long answer type questions of the chapter, The Address. Now, how did the narrator come to know about Mrs. Darling and the address where she lived? Now, years ago, बहुत साल पहले, during the first half of the war, the narrator went home for few days to see her mother. मतलब नरेटर कहीं बाहर रहती थी और उनकी मदर को बार बार विजिट करती थी. तो आफ्टर सीइंग कपल ऑफ डेज वो ये नोटिस करती कि एक लेडी उनके घर आती है जिनका नाम था मिसेस डॉर्लिंग, और वो वहाँ से उनका सामान उठा के लेके जाती है कि कहीं सामान ख़राब ना हो जाए. Now, after staying there a couple of days, she noticed that something or the other about the rooms have changed. She missed various things. Then her mother told her about Mrs. Darling. She was an old acquaintance of her mother, known only, ठीक है, which is socially known acquaintance. She had suddenly turned up after many years. Now she came regularly and took home and took something home with her everything she came. She suggested that she could save her precious belonging by storing them at her place. Mother told her address, number 46 Marconi Street. The narrator asked her mother if she had agreed with her that she should keep everything. Her mother did not like that. She thought it would be an insult to do so. She was worried about the risk Mrs. Darling faced carrying a full suitcase or bag. Now, give a brief account of narrators. Sorry, give a brief account of narrator's first visit to 46 Marconi Street. What impression do you form of Mrs. Darling from it? Now, in the post war period when things turned to normal, ठीक है, post after the war, जब चीज़ें नॉर्मल होने लग गई थी, the narrator became curious about mother's possession that was stored as Mrs. Darling's house. Since she wanted to see them, she took the train and went to Marconi Street. 46 Marconi Street. Mrs. Darling opened the door a chink, मतलब थोड़ा सा, जहाँ से हल्का सा ओपनिंग होता है ना, that is a chink. The narrator came closer, stood on the step and asked her if she still knew her. वो पूछती हैं कि क्या मुझे आप जानते हो, ठीक है. So Mrs. Darling told her that she did not know her. तो Darling ने मना कर दिया कि नहीं, मैं नहीं जानती हूँ, या ना तो वो एक्सेप्ट कर रही थी ना वो बता रही थी. The narrator told her that she was the daughter of Mrs. S. ठीक है, तो वो बताती कि कौन थी वो Mrs. S की डॉटर थी. Mrs. Darling kept staring at her in silence and gave her no sign of recognition. ठीक है, वो Mrs. Darling उनको घूरती रहती है और कोई साइन नहीं बताती है. ठीक है. She held her hand on the door as if she wanted to prevent it opening any further. तो हल्का सा हाथ बीच में रखती ताकि वो खुले ना, दरवाज़ा वो खोल लेना. ठीक है. The narrator recognizes the green knitted cardigan of her mother. अब the narrator कौन है? Mrs. S की डॉटर है, जिन्होंने क्या रिकग्नाइज करी कि मिसेस डॉर्लिंग क्या पहनी हुई, उनकी मदर की knitted cardigan पहनी हुई, cardigan sweater that Mrs. Darling was wearing. ठीक है. मिसेस डॉर्लिंग नोटिस्ड इट एंड हाफ हिड हरसेल्फ बिहाइंड द डोर. अब जब उनको पता चल गया था कि मिसेस एस की डॉटर क्या कर रही, मुझे देख रही हैं, क्यों? क्योंकि वो हाफ निटेड क्या है, हाफ निटेड वो देख रही हैं, हाफ निटेड कार्डिगन है, ठीक है, वो देख रही हैं. सॉरी, नॉट हाफ निटेड, दैट वाज निटेड कार्डिगन देख रही हैं. तो वो क्या करते, वो आधे अपने आप को हाइड कर लेते हैं. ठीक है. The narrator asked again if she knew her mother. फिर से पूछती कि क्या आप मेरी मदर को जानते हो. Mrs. Darling asked with surprise if she had come back. उन्होंने बोला क्या तुम वापस आ रहे हो. उन्होंने ये नहीं बोला कि मैं जानती हूँ या नहीं जानती हूँ, घर आ जाओ, कुछ नहीं बोला, तुम वापस आ रहे हो. She declined to see the narrator or help her. उसने बोला नहीं, मुझे आपसे नहीं मिलना है, and she did not wanted to help her. In what respect was the second visit of the narrator to Marconi Street different from the first one? ठीक है. Did she really succeed in her mission? Give a reason for your answer. Now, the second visit of the narrator to 46 Marconi Street was different from the first one in one respect. बहुत different था. ठीक है. Dining the first visit, the narrator could not get admittance in the house. ठीक है, she could not get through the house. Admittance in the house, whereas during the second one she was led to the living room. पहले में उसको मना कर दिया गया था, घर के बाहर ही खड़े रहे, पर दूसरे में उनको अंदर आने दिया था. Whereas she could see and touch something of the things she had wanted to eagerly to see it. मतलब वो चीज़ थी जो वो देखना चाहती थी, टच करना चाहती थी. कौन? मिसेस एस की डॉटर. ठीक है, तो वो उनको देखा भी. ठीक है, उनको मिला भी देखने के लिए. शी हैड विजिटेड दिस प्लेस विद स्पेसिफिक मदर पर्पस. अब वो इस प्लेस को इसलिए विजिट करती हैं क्योंकि कुछ स्पेसिफिक रीजन रहा होगा. टू सी हर मदर्स बिलोंगिंग्स. क्या वो क्या देखना चाहती थी? अपनी मदर की बिलोंगिंग. द टच एंड साइट ऑफ फेमिलर थिंग्स अराउज मेमोरी ऑफ हर फॉर्मर लाइफ. और उन चीज़ों को हाथ पे लेके टच करना, देखना. उन्होंने क्या करा? मिसेस एस की डॉटर्स को पुराने चीज़ों मेमोरी याद आनी शुरू हो गई. These objects had now lost their real value, for their sins they were served from their own lives and stored in strange circumstances. Now these objects had now lost their real value. Real value जो थी ना, चीज़ें lose कर गई थी. For her sins they were served from their own house and stored in a strange circumstances. जब हमारे घर पे वो चीज़ स्टोर होती तो वो अच्छे से स्टोर होती थी. वो उन मिसेस एस को ऐसे लग रहा था. Thus her mission to see, touch and remember her mother's belonging were partly successful. Partly means adi successful. She resolved to forget these objects and their past and move on. This is clear from her decision to forget the address. Okay, now let's go question number 4. What impression do you form of the narrator? The narrator leaves a very favorable impression on us about her emotional and intellectual qualities. ठीक है, we find her an intelligent but devoted daughter. We find her, she's very intelligent and devoted. अपनी mother को बहुत प्यार करती है. She loves, respects her mother, but does not approve of her soft behavior towards her acquaintance. Mrs. Darling, she puts a pointed question which her mother thinks impolite. ठीक है, the narrator was keen power of observation. She has keen power. उनकी observation की power बहुत strong है. She noticed during her brief stay at home that various things were missing from the rooms. She has a sharp power of judgment. ठीक है, she once sizes up Mrs. Darling. Her persistent efforts to remind Mrs. Darling of her own identity and latter's relations with her mother reveal her indomitable spirit. She visits 46 Marconi Street twice to see, touch, and remember her mother's belonging. She is a very realistic who does not like to remain tagged to the past. Her resolution to forget the address and move on shows her grit and forward looking nature. She has progressive personality. Now comment on the significance of the title, The Address. The title of the story, The Address, is quite apt. It is the spring wheel of the action. In fact, the whole action centers around it. The title is quiet. Sorry, children. The title is quite suggestive and occurs at the beginning, middle, and end of the story. Marga Minko focuses the reader's attention it by the narrator's doubt whether she was mistaken by her assurance that she had reached the correct address. The middle part of the story reveals how she came to know about the address. It was her mother who informed her about the place where Mrs. Darling lived and asked her to remember it. The story ends dramatically where narrator resolved to forget the address. The wheel comes full circle. She has remembered the address for so many years, and now, since the belonging of her mother stored there have lost their successfully, she finds that forgetting these address would be quite easy. Now, thank you, children, for watching the video. Hope you might have liked it. Now these questions, 5 questions, you have to do it properly, learn them, and I hope you could understand through PPT, through summary. Okay, children?